When the concept of slavery is brought up, it's often thought of in the past tense, a barbaric practice from yesteryear, but unfortunately there are still cases of it happening to this very day. On March 31st, 2017, a video was published onto social media that shocked the entire world. The 12-second clip shows a woman desperately hanging from a window using just her bare hands and screaming for help. The person filming offers none, instead calmly stating in her native language, "Oh crazy, come back." It's as the camera pans around that we then see just how high up the two really were, revealing that they were on the 7th floor. Eventually, without any help, her hand begins to slip before falling from the building, remaining in air for 3 seconds before crashing into the metal awning below. As you can imagine, the footage quickly accumulated over 1 million views, as the public was shocked by the potentially lethal drop and the camera holder's inaction to help. It was reposted to Twitter by a third party, who was unable to provide many further details. Her initial caption states that the victim was an Ethiopian domestic worker and the person filming was her Kuwaiti employer. She states that this should stir debate in the Arab world over the treatment of specific groups, though she admitted that actual details of the incident at the time were sketchy. Given how distressing the scene was, discussion arose as people speculated over the circumstances of the event. Some questioned how they ended up in that position in the first place, to which it was posited to have possibly been a suicide attempt. They then attempted to justify the coldness of the woman filming, with one even writing, "If I were in her place, I wouldn't give her my hand because I know she would pull me with her." Others criticized the employer more harshly, stating it would be one thing to freeze and panic, but she intentionally pulled out her phone to record the incident. It also became a question of where this footage had been originally uploaded, as no source had been given by the poster. There was clearly far more to this tale, and thankfully the internet would soon get answers. Shortly after the first clip went viral, a second video was uploaded showing that the victim had indeed survived the fall, and miraculously was not only able to stand up, but even walked immediately after the drop. Paramedics quickly came to the woman's aid and transported her to the hospital, where they found her to have suffered a broken arm as well as bleeding from her nose and her ears. As the story made international headlines, soon local human rights organizations began calling for a criminal investigation. The storm of outrage was even more powerful in the region it occurred, with the hashtag Ethiopian Falling trending as a result for the next 2 days. And their calls were heard as authorities subsequently arrested the employer, citing her lack of meaningful attempts to rescue the victim. Still, something in this story just didn't add up, the most blatant question being why anyone was hanging from a balcony in the first place. Eventually, information would surface that made the camera person's involvement in the situation even more sinister, when a local news outlet secured an interview with the victim while in the hospital. Still recuperating from her injuries, she clarified that despite the rumors, her fall that day wasn't the outcome of a suicide attempt at all, but instead the result of escaping an imminent murder threat. She alleges, "The lady put me in the bathroom and was about to kill me in the bathroom without anyone finding out. She would have thrown my body out like rubbish, so instead of staying there, I went to save myself and then I fell." This not only provided an explanation for why she was hanging from the building, but also changed the camera holder's role from complicit to alleged assailant. Not wanting to rely on just one side of the story, reporters did reach out to the employer for comment. She admitted to being the one to upload the footage online, and that she'd filmed in order to avoid accusations of being responsible for the maid's death. After so much attention being put on the story, the police investigation inevitably turned into a court case that continued throughout the rest of the year. At trial, the employer claimed that she was afraid to extend her hand due to the possibility that the maid would pull her down, before once again indicating that filming the incident was to clear her of any wrongdoing. The court didn't seem to buy her story, and in October of 2018, she was found guilty and sentenced to spend a year and 8 months in prison. On top of the online spread leading to justice being served, another result of the story was that it sparked new discussions over the treatment of domestic workers in the Arab world. With a single Google search, you'd see that stories like these, sadly, are not uncommon. Hundreds of maids are forced to escape their employers every year due to abuse, so much so that the government has set up shelters for them. Just 2 months prior to this story, a couple in the same country had been arrested for torturing and imprisoning their servant, tying her up and depriving the victim of food until she managed to escape. The story today isn't even the first time their escapes have been mislabeled as suicide attempts. In 2009, a human rights organization spoke to 8 women who were reported as having attempted to end their own life, only to find that they had done so in an attempt to escape or had flat out been pushed by their boss. A large part of this is due to systematic problems, which a researcher for Human Rights Watch describes in horrific details. In 2015, Kuwait took steps to provide migrant domestic workers with labor rights, but it has not reformed the notorious kafala system, under which migrant workers cannot leave or change their employer without the employer's permission. As a result, while domestic workers now have rights to a weekly day off, daily limits to their working hours, and overtime compensation, they can still be arrested for absconding if they escape from their employers, even abusive ones. While many like to think stories such as these only happen in lands far away, the unfortunate reality is that modern-day slavery isn't isolated to one part of the world. In fact, our next story takes place right here in the United States. We'll learn more about this after a brief word from our sponsor. Every time you connect to unencrypted Wi-Fi networks at airports, hotels, coffee shops, or even your home, you're at risk. In this scenario, with just a little bit of computer know-how, a hacker could steal your passwords, financial data, or even your emails. This is where ExpressVPN comes into the picture. It encrypts your internet connection using the highest standards of encryption currently available. This is why whenever I travel, I make sure to have ExpressVPN on my phone and computer. They mask my IP and make sure that I am safe. And the reason I pick them over the competition is because they are consistently faster than any other VPN provider. On top of this, it's simple to use, and if I ever do have a problem, I know they have 24/7 customer support that will help. It's no wonder they've been rated the #1 VPN provider by TechRadar, CNET, The Verge, Comparitech, and many more. So if you're interested, find out how you can get 3 months free by clicking the link in the description below, expressvpn.com/GFM. Our second story today begins in Conway, South Carolina at the humble J&J cafeteria. This local restaurant was a staple to the area, offering traditional Southern food that made customers feel right at home. However, things would change in September of 2009, when management was taken over by brothers Ernest and Bobby Edwards. It was then that the quality of the service took a noticeable decline, as customers reported the siblings as being rude. Though what they didn't realize is just how much worse it was behind the counter. Though Ernest was the official owner of the cafeteria, because he owned 2 other establishments, he gave Bobby the sole responsibility to manage J&J. This would turn out to be a devastating mistake, however, mainly due to some increasingly immoral management decisions. Enter John Christopher Smith, an employee who'd spent nearly his entire life working at the eatery, having been hired when he was only 12. You need to understand that Smith struggled with an intellectual disability, reportedly having an IQ of only 70. In spite of this, he'd been treated well for those first 20 years. Until the dubious brothers came to town. It was then that the abuse began, as Bobby Edwards exploited John's disability to effectively treat him as a slave. Mr. Edwards manipulated John into believing that he could have him arrested at any time, which made it so Smith was too afraid to ever reach out for help. Once he ensured his silence, it was then that he began forcing him to work over 100 hours a week, with no breaks or even days off. To avoid paying him, they claimed to transfer his earnings to a bank account they maintained, which he of course was never given access to. He claims Smith's bank account had a sum of over $30,000 in it, though in actuality the restaurant officially reported Smith earning less than $1,000 per quarter. While at work, Bobby would berate the victim whenever he made a mistake or simply wasn't working fast enough. This included belittling John by calling him the N-word, along with a myriad of other racial epithets. As if the words didn't sting enough, Bobby would also beat the mentally challenged man using a belt, as well as with the various pots and pans around the kitchen. In one instance, the manager dipped a pair of metal tongs into hot grease and used it to burn John's neck. Because of this, his body was covered in scratches and bruises, as well as scarring and burn marks. It was often to the point that Smith was so weak he had to be physically carried home, which was a cockroach-infested apartment settled right behind the cafeteria. What makes this story even stranger is that throughout all of this, Smith's family regularly visited the restaurant, though were never allowed to see him. Few outside of staff knew of this treatment, including when Smith was being beaten and screaming for his life. It would only be when one of these workers decided to intervene that this legally defined enslavement would come to an end. Having witnessed the abuse, the anonymous tipster told a family member who often dined at the cafeteria about Smith's treatment. That person, Janine Keynes, took it upon herself to help the victim, even letting him live in her home for a period of time. She then reported the abuse to authorities, going as far as to contact the Department of Social Services. It was due to her efforts that on October 10th, 2014, Smith was rescued by authorities, and a month later, Bobby Edwards was detained for second-degree assault and battery. As the investigation continued, these charges were increased to forced labor due to Smith's treatment resembling that of slave times. Next, the case caught the attention of the Department of Justice as well as the FBI, who found it to be a particularly shocking instance of human trafficking. 5 years after that initial arrest, Bobby pleaded guilty and was sentenced to serve 10 years in prison. He was also ordered to pay Smith a restitution totaling over $500,000. Following his freedom, Smith's entire demeanor changed as he no longer had to constantly live in fear. He later recalled that he felt like he was living in prison and that Bobby could have killed him if he so pleased. He went on to state, "I wanted to get out of there a long time ago, but I didn't have nobody I could go to. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't see none of my family." Thankfully, due to the selfless actions of bystanders, he no longer is in that position. Sherry D. Linden, the district attorney of South Carolina, was quoted in an official statement as stating, "For stealing his victim's freedom and wages, Mr. Edwards has earned every day of his sentence. The U.S. Attorney's Office will not tolerate forced or exploitative labor in South Carolina, and we are grateful to the watchful citizen and our partners in law enforcement who put a stop to this particularly cruel violence." So there you have two cases of modern-day slavery, and unfortunately there are a lot of other examples in the world which I may go in more depth about at a later date. But for now, I think I'll end the video here. So until next time, thanks for watching.